All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning shir. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar Beis, the Schwartzbaum family, for dedicating all the Shema Drushos this month in memory of Rabbi Aaron Schwartzbaum, Aaron Yosef ben Meir Zichron Livracha, Leah's soul in the schus of her daughter Ilana Bas Esther's successful surgery, and a complete refuah shlema for the safe return of our hostages, and Emir Hashem success for our soldiers. Maya Hoffman in memory of her father Ruvain ben Emmanuel Zichron Livracha, and in the merit of Hatzlacha, health and joy for her entire family. Yoel and Sarah Kelman in honor of the birth of their son, and in memory of Staff Sergeant David Sassoon Hashem Yikom Damo, who was killed fighting in Gaza on March 6th. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families Ein Nechama, and all those in the refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Kadosh Baruch Hu should bring our hostages back to their mishpachas and allow our soldiers to be successful b'chol ma'aseh yadehem. Well, with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, today's daf is Chav Zayin 27. Now we are picking up at the Gemara on Chav Vav base 26b. So remember again, I both say the Gemara picks up Amar Rabbi Elazar, Afilu munachin al gabi shulchan. So let's remember again, in the Mishnah we had a number of different cases. The case that the Gemara is referencing over here is the case of the shulchani, the money changer. So what's the halacha by the money changer? So the Mishnah said that lifnei shulchani hare elu shalo, ben akisei v'la shulchani hare elu shal shulchani. So that halacha is like this: if you find money on the ground in front of the money changer. So remember again, it's very important to appreciate the orientation over here. So as opposed to the shopkeeper who sits in front of the counter, right? Remember again, you have the counter, the shopkeeper, and then everyone from the store is interfacing with the shopkeeper. So when the shopkeeper needs something, he reaches back. The shulchani, the money changer is sitting behind the table. So the way it works is, people come, customer approaches the table, puts the money on the table, the shulchani, the money changer exchanges the money. Okay, so now the Mishnah said that any money found in front of the table, the finder can keep. What's the logic? The logic behind that is, if that means a customer dropped it, b'pashtos, the customer has yerush that he's ever going to get it back, and therefore the finder is allowed to keep it. Between the table and the shulchani's chair, so in other words, there's the table, then the shulchani, anything that's dropped, that belongs to the shulchani. Fine. Now Rabbi Elazar comes along and says, Afilu munachin al gabi shulchan. So this is actually an interesting case. So let's say again, I'm walking and I walk by the area where the shulchani normally sits, and there's money left on the table. Quite literally, someone left money on the table. Right? So now the shaila is, who owns that? Rabbi Elazar says, even that belongs to the finder. Afilu munachin al gabi shulchan. Even if you find money on the table, Rashi says over here, I actually forget Rashi right now. Maybe we don't have to get into Rashi. Rashi has a different gear, so we don't have to get into that. Even if you find money on the table itself, the finder is permitted to go ahead and keep that. Says the Gemara. Tanan, lifnei shulchan hare elu shalo. Mishnah said that if you find money in front of the money changer's table, the finder is allowed to keep it. So both say, so it sounds like from the Mishnah that the only thing that you're allowed to keep is money found in front of the table. Ha al gabi shulchan, the shulchani. I could infer from that money on the money table itself belongs to the shulchani, belongs to the money changer. So I'll say that's the inference from the Gemara. However, ima seifa, then look at the latter case in the Mishnah. Beinak kisei v'la shulchani. If you find money between where the money changer sits and the money changer's table, shal shulchani, that belongs to the shulchani. So what can you infer from that? Ha al gabi shulchan shalo. Yet I could infer from that if you find money on the money changing table itself, then halacha l'maisa, you could keep it. The finder could keep it. So I want to say, what do you see from here? You see from here that you have competing or contradictory inferences from the Mishnah. Tuition Gemara says, you're right. You're right. You can't really infer anything from the Mishnah because the Mishnah ultimately, again, could really lead to two different conclusions. Okay. So I have Rabbi Elazar ha minale. So we'll say, so here's what we have. We have right the Mishnah, and we have Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar is coming along and saying that halacha l'maisa, money found on the table. I just want to paint the case accurately. Obviously, right, if the shulchan is sitting at the table, and I walk by, and he's transacting business, and there's money on the table, so Rabbi Elazar is not saying, okay, great, fantastic, let me chop that up and put it in my pocket. What he's talking about is, let's say the shulchan closed up for the day. He's done with work for the day. I'm walking by, there's $20 on the table. Rabbi Elazar says, I, the finder, am allowed to keep that money. I don't have to assume that ultimately, again, it belongs to the shulchani, nor do I have to assume that it belongs to someone, but everyone understands that because money is constantly changing hands on the table, if someone leaves money on that table, they're going to be miyayish. That's the point over here. That's what those points. Therefore, I find money on the money changer's table. I, the finder, am allowed to keep that because halacha l'maisa, I could assume that there was yeyush. Now the problem is, where is Rabbi Elazar getting that from? So we try to infer it from the Mishnah. The Mishnah gives me competing inferences. So I ask the Gemara, Rabbi Elazar, haminale. So Rabbi Elazar, where do you get this idea from, that the finder is allowed to keep money found on the table? Amarava masnisin keshise. Rabbi Elazar was bothered in general by the Mishnah. See, he was bothered. What was he bothered by? So my area detani ben akise la shulchani shal shulchani. Why is it that the Mishnah dafka uses the case or uses the phrase as saying, if money is found between where the shulchani sits and the money changing table itself, that belongs to the shulchani. Listening al shulchan. I was supposed to say, why doesn't the Mishnah say like this? Any money found on the table belongs to the shulchani. Now, if money found on the table belongs to the shulchani, then what does that automatically include? What does that include? Money found between the table and where the shulchani sits. Right? In other words, if the shulchani gets the money on the table, alachas kama v'kama, he gets the money between where he sits and the table. So the Gemara says, inami matzah b'shulchanos kediktani reisha matzah b'chanos shelo. So we'll say furthermore, also go ahead and make it parallel to the first case, right? Go ahead and articulate if you find money on the tables, just like you said in the first case of the Mishnah, if you find money in the stores. Ela shmamina. So also here's what's interesting. From the fact that the Mishnah does not phrase it that way, Ela shmamina, afilu munachin agabe shulchan har elu shalo. So I both say, here's what's interesting. So the fact that the Mishnah does not say, if money is found on the table, it belongs to the shulchani, and then that would have covered, including money found between where the shulchani is sitting and the table itself as well. So the fact that it doesn't say that indicates to us what? That money found on the table does not belong to the shulchani. Rather, money found on the table actually belongs to the finder. Shmamina. So we'll say that is the position ultimately again of Rabbi Elazar, and we'll say this is the position adopted by the Rambam as well. So halacha l'maisa, what comes out in the kind of like the complete rounded out case of the shulchani is like this: if you find money in front of the table of the shulchani, belongs to the finder. If you find money on the shulchani's table, right? He closed up shop. There's money on the table, belongs to the finder. If, however, money is found between the table and where the shulchani sits, that belongs to the shulchani. Beautiful. Let's go back there. Says the Gemara, halokeach peros mechavero. So we'll say last case in the Mishnah. Last case in the Mishnah is I purchase produce from Ruvain, and inside of the produce I find money. I buy, just a simple case, I buy a basket of apples from Ruvain. Inside of the basket is money. So what's the halacha? What's the halacha? Ultimately, I, the purchaser, I could keep that money. However, the Mishnah said, if the money was piled or the money was somehow bundled in a way that really showed some level of intentionality, then ultimately I get no talum achriz. Then I'm obligated to try to track down the owner. Okay, so let's analyze. Amrei Shlakish Bishram Yanai, Lo Shanu Ella, top of Chav Zayin Abosai. Lo Shanu Ella. Good. Lo shanu ella belokeach min atagar. So we'll say, when do we say that ultimately, again, if you find money in the basket, that you're allowed to keep it? That's when you are purchasing the produce from a merchant. In other words, we'll say, if you could imagine for a moment, there's two ways to purchase produce, right? I could purchase directly from the farmer, or I could purchase from I don't know what you would call it. I guess like a wholesaler, right? Or a merchant. Now, a merchant himself is shopping it out from other farmers. So comes along Rish Lakish and says like this: When do we say if I'm purchasing fruit from Ruvain and I find money in a basket of fruit that I'm allowed to keep the fruit? That's only when I'm purchasing it from a merchant. Look at Tab Rashi. Tab Rashi comes down in 27a. Because Ruvain, the merchant, also, right, this is not his own produce. He purchased this produce from farmers. Since ultimately, again, Ruvain himself is purchasing this produce from other people, from groups of people, and therefore, again, there's no real way to know who the owner of this money is. Money in general doesn't have a siman. That's when I'm allowed to keep it. Aval, but I'll say, watch this. If Reuven is the farmer, and I'm purchasing the produce from Reuven himself, so which means Reuven did not shop this out from other people, and I find money inside of the basket, I'm obligated to announce the money. I'm obligated to try to track down the owner. Because I will say, in that case, the fruit is really only coming from one source. Because it's coming from one source, there is a possibility, a strong possibility, that maybe this is Reuven's money. Say from Chayv to Machris. The Chayin taught to come to Rav Nachman, and so too they taught us in front of Rav Nachman. Lo shanu ela b'lokeach min hatagar. When do we say that if you find money inside the basket of fruit, that you're permitted to keep it? That's only when you're purchasing it like from a wholesaler, from a merchant who's buying it from many different sources. There's no real way to track down this money. Money doesn't have a siman. You could keep it. But ultimately, again, if you buy it from the balabais, you buy it from the farmer himself, chayv lahachzir. You're obligated to return the money to the farmer. Now, obviously, I'm not obligated just to show up and give him money, but I am obligated to be machris. Right? I'm obligated to say, I found something, right? I found something in the basket. If you lost something, please let me know. Amar Nachman, I don't understand. So this is very interesting. The Gemara says, so now you're telling me that if halacha l'maisa, you go ahead and I purchase the produce directly from the farmer, from Reuven, right? And now I find money in the basket. I'm obligated to announce that find. Now I will say, that's presupposing that what? So do you think that Reuven the Balabayas is the one who harvested the fruit himself? It's the Jews we're talking about over here, right? We've got a guy, right? So Bepashto, it's like, I have workers, right? Reuven has workers in his field. So you have to understand something. So there's as much of a probability that money belongs to one of Reuven's workers that it belongs to Reuven. Or in other words, or maybe even there's a greater probability that the money belongs to one of Reuven's workers more than it belongs to Reuven. So why would I have an obligation to return the found money to Reuven? To which the Gemara says, so this is incredible. So Amalei, Ismay, so he responded back, so what should I do? Should I go ahead and erase this teaching? In other words, okay, he acknowledged that maybe it's slow, but what should I do? Should I erase the teaching? Amalei, lo, tetarge masnisin kegon shadashan al yedei avdo v'shivchaso haknanim. No, rather explain the case the Mishnah is talking about what? Where Reuven's field is harvested by his avodim. Now I will say, remember, masha kana eved kana rabo, whatever the slave acquires, whatever the servant acquires, the master acquires, and therefore again in a case where Reuven is harvesting his field through his avodim, the man of shach, that money belongs to Reuven, right? Whether it's Reuven's actual money himself or it's his servant's money, either way, it's his. Said Rabbi say, what comes out over here is really halacha l'maisa, two different halachas, right? So halacha number one is if I'm going ahead and I'm purchasing produce from a wholesaler, from a merchant, and I find money inside of that basket, I'm allowed to keep it. Now, of course, the exception is what? If the money has some type of intentional placement, or the money is arranged in some type of intentional way, then I'll be obligated to be machrazit. But otherwise, again, I'm allowed to keep it. However, if I'm purchasing produce directly from the farmer, directly from the owner of the field, and I find money in there, then halacha l'maisa, again, I would be obligated to go and announce it. But it sounds like only if that's the case where I know that the owner of the field is harvesting produce with his own avodim. But if he has other hired workers, then halacha l'maisa would appear that I'm not obligated to go ahead and announce it, because the truth is, maybe it belongs to Reuven, maybe it belongs to the workers, and either way, again, there's going to be an assumed yesh. And this indeed is how the Rambam So the Rambam Paskins as well. I found this case is very interesting, right? Because you're talking about a case of purchasing produce and then finding money inside of the basket. So here, look how the Rambam phrases it. He says, "Perak tezayin halacha vav halokech peros mechavero o sheshalach lo chavera peros umatza besochon maos tzururos." So the Rambam begins with the case, and I will say, by the way, you could just imagine this in a case of somebody says yishalach manos, right? They send you a basket of apples, right, or whatever, and a bottle of wine, right, together, right? So now there's money piled inside of that basket, right? Tzururos. This is the case of intentional placement. So because it's intentional placement, I'm obligated to announce what I found. Matzan mefuzaros, but if I found scattered money in the basket of produce, hare'elu shalom, I'm allowed to keep that. When is that so? So I'll say that is true when the produce comes from a merchant or from a balabas who purchased from a merchant. However, avalim abala bayis dosh haperos liatzmo. But if the owner of the produce, the person who gave me the produce, either I know he does his own farming, or farming is done through his avadim, in that case he would be obligated to go out and return the money to him. Incredible. Pretty much just as it's laid out in front of the Gemara. Excellent. Let's go back to Mishnah. Af hasimla haisa bichlal kalelu. So I will say, now we're going to talk about the pasuk by Hashavas Aveda. So let me just give you the context. The pasuk says like this: V'chein saseh lechamoro. This is what you should do for his donkey. V'chein saseh lesimloso. This is what you should do for his garment. V'chein saseh lechol avedas achicha. This is what you should do for any lost object that your brother loses. Asher tovad mimeno, that is lost from him. Umitzasa, and you find it. Lo sucha lehisalem. You cannot turn away from it. So this is the part of the mitzvah of Hashavas Aved. And actually, this pasuk I will say is Lo Sucha L'Salim. This is the pasuk that tells you that if you find something, you can't pretend like you didn't see it and turn away from it. There's another pasuk of Hashem Teshivim. You have to return it. So I will say the Mishnah is coming from the vantage point of why does the pasuk have to articulate the garment? We're going to see the pasuk itself is redundant because the pasuk says if you find your friend's donkey, his garment, or anything that he loses. Now, once you have that phrase, anything that he loses, why they need to be item specific at all? So the Mishnah says, Afa simla haisa bichlal. So simla, right, finding your friend's garment was obviously included in the phrase of anything your friend loses. Sa'ai v'lama yatzasa. So ultimately, again, why was it specifically articulated? Lahaki shelah. In order to create a hekesh. What's the hekesh? We'll say, what's unique about a garment? Number one, a garment has a siman. Number two, when the garment is lost, someone is going to be looking for it. So too, av kol davar sheish bo simanin v'yesh lo tovim chayav lahachriz. So we'll say, so Simla is here to teach us a paradigm. What is the type of item for which you are obligated in the midst of Hashavas Aved, of returning a lost object? What type of item? It has to satisfy two criteria. Number one, it has a siman. Number two, someone is looking for it. Now we'll say, what is so siman? I understand. What does it mean someone's looking for it? It means the owner didn't have yeyush. Right? Obviously, if the owner had yeyush, he's not looking for his object. So this is a very important rule. In order for there to be a mitzvah shavas aveda, the lost object must satisfy two criteria. Number one, it has a siman. Number two, the owners are looking for it, i.e., they did not have yeyush. Here we go. My bichlal kol elu. So we'll say, what else is included in this? What's included in this rule? Amarava, Bichlal Kol Avedas Achicha. So let's say because the Mishnah said that Simla was included in the general rule. What's the general rule? The Gemara says, okay, that's the other phrase in the pasuk, Kol Avedas Achicha, anything that your brother loses. Amarava, Lamali Dikasav Rachmana Shar Chamar Simla. So we'll say, so now Rava says, okay, well let's broaden this question a little bit. Why does the pasuk need to say Shar, Chamar, Se, and Simla? The truth is, over here, the Gemara is really referencing two different psukim. same parak, all right, and all speaking about the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, or ultimately again, right, the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. So the Torah goes out of its way to mention all of these items: shar, an ox; chamar, donkey; seh, sheep; simla, garment. And telling me in all these cases, if I see the lost object of my friend, I'm obligated to return it. Why? In other words, and I want to just point out, the question is really amplified by the fact that the Torah says, "Kol avedas achicha." Whatever your brother loses, you are obligated to return. So that's it. Once you have that phrase, why do I need anything else besides that? So here we go. It's really interesting. So tzrichi, you need all of it. I'll tell you why. Because of Rahmana Simla, if the Torah would have just said Simla, Hava mina hanimili be'edim de gufa, v'simanim de gufa. So I will say, this is actually interesting. I would have thought that maybe Simla means like this. When are you obligated to go ahead and return the object? Maybe when you have witnesses, right, that Ruvain owned the object, and ultimately again, Ruvain has a siman that he owns the object. Ava chamar be'idim du'ukaf v'siman du'ukaf ema lo mahadrin alei. So Rabbi said, this is very interesting. I would have thought, when are you obligated to go ahead and return an object? When there's eidos, right, either testimony or an actual siman in the body of the object itself. Okay, what about the following case? Let's say Ruvain loses his donkey. Donkey has a saddle. Ruvain is able to give a siman in the saddle, but not able to give a siman in the donkey. In other words, I don't know, I guess all donkeys look the same, right? There's no distinguishing feature in the donkey. But Ruvain could say the saddle, which was on the donkey, so I will say, you might have thought that halacha l'maisa, well, if you could give a siman in the saddle, but not the donkey, then what does that get you? That gets you a saddle, but doesn't get you a donkey. Kamash malon, kamash asirase, and that the danger. See, if it would have just said simla, what's unique about simla? Simla has either eidos or a siman in the actual item itself. That's when you get back your item. But perhaps again, if you could just identify the saddle, you don't get the donkey. Kamash malan, the Torah comes along and says, Kasav Rachmana Chamar. Torah writes Chamar to teach you what? Dafilu Chamar b'simani ha'okaf. To teach me that no. So the way it works with the donkey is actually really interesting. The way it works with the donkey is that Allah Chalamahisa, if you could identify the saddle, you get back the saddle and the donkey. Right? In other words, the saddle and the donkey are looked at as one entity, so a siman in the saddle earns you back your donkey as well. Sharv said, some will say, that's why I need chamar. So now I know simla. Simla is like the paradigm. The ability to give a siman in the object itself. Chamar teaches me that if you could go ahead and identify an accessory that is almost always attached to the primary item, that you get back the accessory and the primary item. Okay, next. But so why do I need Sharvaseh? Dafila, listen to this. Legizas zinavo, right? So Shar dafila legizas zinavo. So Shar teaches me, Rabbi say, that Allah Chalamais again. It refers even to the hair on the end of the tail. In other words, what am I obligated to return? Even if I find the tail hair of Ruvain's Shar, I'm obligated to return. Rabbi say, I guess Bepashtos, tail hair is relatively insignificant. But even a relatively insignificant item, you still have a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. Now, obviously, there's only a mitzvah if it's Shava Pruta, but I have a mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda. The Se Ligizosav, and similarly again, if you find the shearings of Ruvain's wool, you're obligated to return that as well. So if that's the case, just write Shar. If you write Shar, which teaches you that I'm obligated to return even tail hair, so if you're obligated to return tail hair, then you're also obviously obligated to return what? Shearings, and therefore I can leave off Seh. Amarava Chamar Debar Rabbi Yehuda. The Seh David Divrei Kol Kasha. So Rava says you're right. The truth is, in general, Chamar, according to the interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda by bar. Remember again, what does Rabbi Yehuda say by bar? Rabbi Yehuda holds that, we saw this in Bava Kama. Rabbi Yehuda holds that by bar, that you're chayiv for niskei kelim. You're chayiv even if halacha l'maisa again, utensils are broken in a bar. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, what to do with bar and se da'aveda. So two different comments over here. The divrei kol kasha. So the Gemara acknowledges, Rabbi say, that in this whole thing, we'll leave us out of Rabbi Yehuda bar, but really se of aveda, we're not sure why you need it. I understand why I need simla, right? Simla teaches me the paradigm of being able to have a siman in the object of the item itself. Chamar teaches me that if I have a siman in an attached accessory that allows me to gain back the primary item. Shar teaches me that even tail hair has to be returned. Se, it's not clear. We wanted to say se teaches me shearings, I have to return shearings. But if you have to return tail hair, then what? You certainly have to return shearings. So the Gemara just acknowledges se, we're not 100% sure what to do with it. I, the Gemara says, maybe se comes to teach you that you're obligated to return minor. In other words, we'll say manure, right? The waste of the animal has a value as well. So maybe I don't know who's picking that up, but right. Can you imagine walking down the street, right? But let me say again, okay, at the end of the day, maybe I'm obligated to return that, right? So the Gemara says. So this is actually interesting. Even though manure obviously does have a value, but Lamaisa bepashtos, people are mafkir their manure. In other words, that when the animal relieves itself, people don't expect to get that back. Okay? The dimal is siman and hudasa. I'll say maybe se comes to teach me just about the ikar halacha of simanim. Now I'll say now we're going to get into something very exciting. The bailan simanim daraisa derabanan. Now I'll say, and we're going to talk about this in just a little bit. In general, the concept of a siman. The concept of a siman, in other words, the ability to identify something, or I should say the ability to establish ownership by dint of the ability to provide a siman, right? A siman, an identifying marker, identifying feature of the object. Is that a din d'oraisa, or is that a din d'rabanan? And we're going to see why that makes a difference just a little bit. Maybe, kasav rachmana seh, dafilu b'simanim mahadrinan, v'simanim daraisa. I will say, maybe seh, interestingly enough, maybe the word seh is actually coming to teach me that the concept of a siman works, and simanin are daraisa. So let's say, see what's happening over here? So therefore, again, one more time, simla would be teaching me that a siman, ideally you need a siman in the object itself. Chamar teaches me that if you have a siman in an attached accessory, that you get back the accessory and the primary item. Se teaches, or I should say, shar teaches me even have to return something insignificant like tail hair. And what does se teach me? Se teaches me that the concept that you return, teaches me the ikar concept that you return lost objects through a siman, and simanin are daraisa. Okay, that's a good suggestion. The Gemara says, Amri, here's the problem with that. Mediktani lehu tana lesimanin gabe simla, diktani masimla miyuchad sheish ba simanin v'yesh ba tovin, chayv lahachris, af kol davar sheish ba simanin v'yesh ba lo tovin, chayv lahachris, shmamina l'steseh lav l'simanin hu da'asam. So I will say, here's the problem. The problem is, if you look at the Lashon of the Mishnah really used salma. Right, the Mishnah went ahead and really used, ultimately again, simla, sorry. They used a garment as the paradigmatic example of an item returned with a siman. So it sounds like the concept of a siman is being learned out from simla, not from seh, to which the Gemara says, you're right. So therefore, both say the way this sugi really ends off over here is, we're not sure what to do with seh. I know what to do with everything else in the psukim, but I don't know what to do with seh. So seh is still our outstanding question. Why is that included in the pasuk, and what is the lesson? Hold on to that. Tanrabanan, here we go. Asher tovad. So we'll say the pasuk says you have to return to your fellow, return to your friend anything that he loses. Prat la'aveda shein bo shava pruta. So we'll say this comes to exclude a lost object that doesn't have a shava pruta. We'll say it's actually very important. Allah lamaisa, if you find an object and it doesn't have a pruta, doesn't have a shava pruta, everyone agrees there is no mitzvah of hashava saveda. No mitzvah of lost object. Rabbi Huda says umitzasa, and you will find it. Prat la'aveda she'in bo shava pruta. So I just want to point that over here. So the Tanakama is saying asher tovad, that which is lost. There is only an obligation to return a lost object when the object is considered to be lost. What's the definition of being lost? That you are worth at least a pruta. If you're not worth a pruta, then ultimately, again, we don't even view it as being lost. Rabbi Huda says, umitzasa, what are you obligated to return? You're obligated to return something you find. So prat la'aveda she'en bo shava pruta. This comes to exclude something that's not worth a pruta. So I will say, so bepashtos, they're saying the same thing. right? They're saying the same, they're just darshaning it two different ways. So the Gemara says, I don't understand what's the practical difference between them. They're both saying that halacha l'maisa, if the lost object is not worth a pruta, then halacha l'maisa, there is no obligation to go ahead and return it. So my benayu, Amar Abaye mashmos darshan ika benayu. So Abaye says there is no practical difference except that they're just both learning out the halacha from two different sources. So the Gemara says, Mar nafkale me asher tovad, umar nafkale mi umitzasa. One is learning out from the pasuk of if you will lose it, and one is learning out from the phrase if you will find it. I will say, so here's what I just want to point out, is something very interesting, right? So one opinion is saying that halacha l'maisa, again, something is only considered lost if it's worth a pruta. The other opinion says something is only considered to be found if it's worth a pruta. And now practically, the Gemara says, what are they arguing about? So the Gemara says, practically they're saying the same thing. The machlokes is on the drasha, right? Where are you deriving this halacha from? So here we go. So haya asher tovad my avile. So what's according to the opinion that learns that from mitzasa? What does he do with asher tovad? Mi baile lechid Rabbi Yochanan. We'll say first white line. Dam Rabbi Yochanan mishram b'shem Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan saying b'shem Yochai. Minay la veda sheshat fanar shimuteres. We've seen this before. How do you know, right? If Reuven has an object and the river washed away the object, how do I know that I'm allowed to keep that object when I find it? Shneimar kein ta'aseh lechol avedas achicha asher tovad mimenu umitzasa. This is what you shall do for the lost object of your friend if you find him. Hashavas aveda. Mish avuda hemenu mitzvah etzel kol adam. Now what we saw before. When is there a mitzvah of hashavas aveda? When is there a mitzvah to return a lost object? When I will say ultimately again the object is lost to the owner but readily available to everyone else. But I will say if you have a case of an object that is lost to its owner but not available to other people, what would be an example of that? Object swept away by the river, which in this case the owner doesn't have it, and what? Neither does anyone else. In that case, I will say there is no mitzvah hashavas aveda. V'idach hadra b'noy minalei. And the other opinion, where will he learn out this halacha from? Nafkale mi umitzasa. Find the extra lashon. V'idach had Rabbi Yochanan minalei. Where do you see Rabbi Yochanan's halacha? Nafkale mimenu. He learns that from mimenu. V'idach mimenu lo mashmalei. And the other opinion doesn't dash mimenu. Okay. Rava Amar. So let's listen to this next case. Pruta shehuzla ikebenayam. So Rava says no, there is a nafkamina. Rava say, we were kind of looking at this, that there is no distinction between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Yehuda, right? That they're both agreeing that Allah if the lost object does not have the value of a pruta, there is no mitzvah of hashavas aveda. And there's no distinction between. I remember again, the Tanakama is learning it out from asher tovad, right? And Rabbi Yehuda is learning it out from umitzasa. So Rava comes along and says, no, there actually is a nafkamina. Both say, watch this case. So Rava Amar, Pruta shehuzla ika benayu. They both say, watch this case. Watch this case. What happens, they both say, if Reuven lost an object, and when he lost it, it was a shava pruta. But by the time I find it, it's no longer worth a pruta. So is there a mitzvah of hashavas aveda in that case? So watch this. Mandar me asher tovad ika. So according to the opinion of asher tovad, he says the obligation of hashava is established at the time that the object is lost. And if at the time that the object was lost it had the value of a pruta, even if it subsequently depreciates before I find this, so by the time I find that it's pachos mishava pruta, I'm still obligated to return it. So mitzasa leka. But according to the second opinion, Rabbi Yehuda learns that from mitzasa, the obligation of hashava, the obligation to return it, is established at the time that I found it. If at the time that I found it the object was worth less than a pruta, then Allah said there is no mitzvah of hashava. I ulaman da amar asher tovad ha ba'inanu mitzvah savaleka. Rabbi say according to the opinion that says asher tovad, that it's lost. What about, again, what do you do with the fact that at Lamaisa, it's not worth a shava pruta at the time that you find it? Ela pruta shehokra ika benayu. Rather, Rabbi say, no, the nafkamina case will be, Reuven lost an object. At the time that he lost it, it was worth less than a pruta, but when I found it, it was more than a pruta. Mandar mitzasa ika, the person who holds a mitzasa, right, that everything goes by when you find it, there's an obligation of hashava. Umandar masher tovad, And the one who says ultimately again that you lose it, leka, that is established at the time that you lost the object. When Reuven lost it, was less than a proof. There's no mitzvah shav saveda. I uleman dara mitzasa haba inon asher tavad veleka. But according to the opinion who says that it goes by when you found it. I will say again, obviously it's only meaningful to find something if it was first lost. So if it wasn't worth a proof at the time that it was lost, why would there be a mitzvah? Why would there be a mitzvah shav saveda? Ella, I will say, Ella, you're right. What's the case? Pruta shehokra v'hozla, v'chazra v'hokra. Rather, I will say, here's what happens. Here's what happens. We had a case ultimately again of an item that appreciated, depreciated, and then subsequently appreciated. So that by the time ultimately again the finder finds it, it's now worth a pruta. But along this process, it became less than a shava pruta. So what's talacha? So man da amar asher tovad ika uman da amar amitzasa ba'ina de ispe shir mitziasa mishas aveda at shas mitzia. So we'll say, now listen to this. So just to find out what's the case. Reuven lost an object. The object was worth a proof at the time that he lost it. Then during the time that it was lost, it depreciated, pachom shava pruta, appreciated, came back to a shava pruta. Now I find it and it's a shava pruta again. Am I obligated to return it? So according to the Tanna Kama, who says, Asher Tovad, that the mitzvah Hashavas Haveda is determined at the time that the object was lost. Since at the time that it was lost, it was worth a pruta, there is an obligation to return it. But the second opinion, who says, Umitzasa, that it goes by when you found it, there's only a mitzvah of Hashava if what? If the item maintained a value of a pruta the entire time. But if at any point in this process it dipped below a pruta, then halacha l'maisa there is no obligation to go ahead and return it. You know, we'll say, so this machlokes remains outstanding. We're going to see this in the Rambam a little bit later. But l'maisa, in a general sense, okay, so we found the case where there's a machlokes, but in a general sense they're agreeing on the principle. What's the principle? There is only a mitzvah of Hashavas Haveda if what? The object is worth a pruta. If the object is pachos mishava pruta, then I will say in halacha it's as if the object doesn't exist. I will say that it's an interesting yisod also. I think like from b'derech hashkafa. So I'll say an object that is lost can only be returned if the object has a value. If it doesn't have a value, then it says if the object doesn't exist, there's no mitzvah to return it. So I will say it's the same yisod in tshuva as well. When is tshuva possible? Tshuva is only possible when you believe that you are at least a shava pruta. Right? So in life I make many mistakes. And as a result of those mistakes, I have suffered significant depreciation. As long as I am a shava pruta, I believe in myself that I still have a value, then there's mitzvah Hashavas Haveda. Then ultimately, again, I can return that which is lost. I still exist, and therefore, again, I can engage in the process of personalistic rehabilitation. The challenge in life is when a person feels that they're so broken, that they're pachos mishave pruta. If I get to a point in life where I feel like I'm a nothing, I'm pachos mishave pruta, tshuva is impossible. There's no Hashavas Haveda, there's no returning of lost objects. Why? Because we'll say, when a person feels about themselves that they're pachos mishava pruta, there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing to deal with. The most important piece in affecting the process of tshuva is believing that you still have value even in the aftermath of your life mistakes. Now again, my value may be diminished, my value may be compromised, but as long as I believe in myself that I am at least shava pruta, then there's Hashavas Haveda. Then I can return the lost object. Chas v'shalom, a person is miyayish on themselves. A person believes that I'm pachos mishava pruta. That's when return to HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes virtually impossible. We make mistakes. We all make mistakes. And some of us, some real doozies. But l'maisa, no matter what life mistakes you've made, always remember that you are never pachos mishava pruta. If you believe that, and you remember that, tshuva, hashavas haveda, always possible. Let's go back there. Says the Gemara, we'll say, so now the Gemara introduced us to a really fascinating discussion. Say Bailahu, Simanim Daraisa O Dirabanan. So I'll say, so now let's go back to the question we mentioned before. So, we've been operating, right? All of Eila Metzias is about the power of a siman, right? If I'm able to identify something in a lost object, ultimately, again, it's returned to me. Is the concept of a siman d'oraisa or d'rabanan? Now, why does that matter? My nafkin, the Gemara says, who cares? I'm a base. I'll tell you why it matters, says the Gemara. La dure get isha b'simanim. It matters, I will say, for the following case. Let's say again, we actually have seen this kind of case before. A shaliach, right? Reuven is divorcing his wife Rachel, and Reuven appoints a shaliach. Shaliach is delivering the get, and shaliach loses the get. He loses the get. Now the good news is, right? Bad news is shaliach lost the get. Good news is that what? There are some unique identifying features about the get that the shaliach knows how to identify. So let's say now Shimon finds the get. Shaliach comes, all right, so Shimon announces, I found something. Shaliach goes ahead and gives an identifying mark of the get. Do we give the get back to the shaliach or not? So we'll say, now remember, get is pretty significant, right? Get is matters of Eishes Ish, get is Isser. So if you say that simanim work even mid'oraisa, then we will give back the get to the shaliach if he's able to furnish simanim. V'amrit d'rabanan. However, if we go ahead and we say that simanim are only d'rabanan, then ki avud rabbanan takanta b'mamona. So now watch this is fascinating. So if you say that simanim work with daraisa, so then simanim will work in all cases, right? They'll work in mamon monetary cases and they'll work in isser cases. If, however, you say that simanim are only dirabanan, then halacha l'maisa it'll work in monetary cases, but will not work in isser cases. So that would mean if shaliach loses the get, even though he's able to identify everything in the get, we will not return it to him because that is a case of isser. So we'll say, so this is now like it's interesting, like, feels like we should have dealt with this question at the beginning of the parak, right? Because this is like a pretty fundamental question, but I'll tell you why we haven't. Why haven't we? Because remember, I will say this entire time, pretty much we've been dealing with monetary cases, right? The loss of a monetary object, and therefore can you return the monetary object? So I will say, here's the good news. Everyone is agreeing that simanim works for that, right? Because even if simanim are d'rabanan, they're going to work in monetary cases. But now we get to the kishkas of the question, do simanim work mid'oraisa or just mid'rabanan? Nafkamina, does a siman work in a case of isser like get? So Tashma, let's analyze. So we'll say, going back to the Mishnah said simla was included, simla, which means a garment, was included in the general catch-all phrase of kol avedas achicha, anything your brother loses. V'lama yotzesa, so why was simla articulated on its own? To compare other items to simla. Just like a simla is unique, a garment is unique, and that's why it has a siman, and someone's claiming it, and therefore you're obligated to announce it if you found it. So to any item that has simanim and has people claiming it, you're chayiv to announce it. Now, bosai. So what are we learning out over here? We're learning out the concept of simanim from a word in the Torah, which would seem to make simanim what? A din da'araisa. A din da'araisa, to which the Gemara says, maybe not. Tana, tovin itzrichale. Maybe not. I will say, maybe the drush of simla is actually really teaching me about tovin, that you're only obligated to go ahead and return an object when someone is claiming it, as opposed to a situation where there's yeyosh. But really, we're not learning out simanim over here. Simanim is just mentioned kind of derech agav in passing. But the real drasha is about tovin, not about simanim. So therefore, I have no raya whether or not simanim are daraisa d'rabbanan. Next, simanim kedei nasba, and simanim are really just brought along for the ride. Okay, so therefore we have to try to prove we have to try to answer from a different source. So Tashma, chamar b'simani ukaf. We'll say, what did we learn before? That you can return a donkey, right? The donkey is returned even if what? Even if you're just able to give a siman in the saddle. So we'll say, what do you see from here? That's siman daraisa, right? And I was well say, the fact that I could return the donkey, even with just the simanim of the saddle, would indicate that siman daraisa. To which the Gemara says, no, Ima, instead of saying simane okaf, Ema be'edei okaf. I will say maybe the way it works ultimately again by the donkey is if there is eidos that I own the saddle, eidos testimony, not simonim, eidos that I own the saddle, so that would entitle me to receive back the saddle and the donkey. So Tashma, Sefer will say no raya again. Tashma, another proof. Vaya imcha ad dirosh achicha oso. So we'll say, so the pasuk says, you will go ahead and keep the lost object with you until your brother seeks it out. Adarosh achicha oso. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Now we'll say, now, why does the pasuk have to say that? That I keep the object with me until my brother comes and seeks it out. Is there a havamina that I would return a lost object to my brother if he didn't seek it out? We'll say, what? Obviously, I'm only returning something if the owner comes and tries to retrieve it from me. If the owner doesn't come and try to retrieve it, I'm not giving back anything. So why does the pasuk have to say that? Ella darshehu im ramayhu o eno ramay. Rather, what it means is like this: when someone comes to retrieve a lost object, don't be so trusting. And don't just give it over. Rather, ask questions. Ask questions. Darshan a little bit. Is the person trying to retrieve the object? Is he honest or chas v'shalom dishonest? I was saying, how are you doing that? My love bisimanim. Are we not doing that with simanim? In other words, I say to Reuven, Reuven comes over, I found the object. Reuven says, no, that's my object. Reuven, okay, no problem. Prove it. Prove it. Give me some simanim. And what do you see from here? That simanim are da'oraisa. To which the Gemara says, lo, be'edim. Maybe not. Maybe what it's saying is like this. I find the object. Reuven says, hey, that's my object. Saying, Reuven, no problem. Some testimony. Give me some eidos. Bring me a witness that you own this object. I'll be happy to give it back to you. So Tashma, Yisrael says another interesting case. Ein mi'idin al pirtzaf hapanim imachotem. I'm sorry. Ein mi'idin ella al pirtzaf hapanim imachotem. So Rabbi say this is talking about a case. Reuven's married to Rachel. Now what happens? Reuven dies. We want to let Rachel remarry. So let's say this is talking about a case where, not a simple case where Reuven dies at home, or right, but let's say again Reuven dies somewhere overseas. We want to be able to give Rachel the permission to remarry. We'll say, so now you have to identify the body. How do we ascertain that it's truly Reuven that died? So the Gemara says, in order to have real identification of Reuven, you have to identify his face. It has to be like a visual recognition, face together with the nose. That profile, if somebody's able to say that's Reuven, then ultimately again Rachel could get married based on that testimony. Afapi sheyesh simanim begufo ubekelov. Here's what's interesting. In order to allow Rachel to remarry, somebody has to identify Reuven by facial recognition. You have to be able to look at his face and say that's Reuven. Even if someone could identify Reuven with simanim on his body, right? Let's say certain physical identifying signs, or certain simanim on his kelim, his clothing, his accessories, that is not enough. We'll say, what do you see from here? Shmamina simanim lav da'oraisa. Now, I will say what you see from here is that simanim are not da'oraisa. Why? Because I will say if a siman was a da'oraisa, then you should be able to identify Reuven by what? By dint of a siman on his body. Or maybe by dint of a siman, in his utensils. The fact that a siman doesn't work to allow Rachel to remarry, only thing that works is actual facial recognition, indicates to us that simanim are d'Rabbanan and not d'oraisa. So that's why, again, simanim will work for monetary matters, but simanim will not work for isser matters. To which the Gemara says, no. That is not true. Amri, gufal da'arach v'gutz, Kalev the Chashin and the Sheila. Then I say that's not it. When we say that you can't identify Reuven's body by simanim, what that means is they'll say you can't use like a basic siman, like it's a tall body and Reuven was tall, or it's a short body and Reuven was short. They'll say those are nondescript. So those type of simanim will not allow Rachel to remarry. Similarly, again, the problem I say with using utensils, right, or accessories as a form of identification of Reuven. Is that what? Maybe he borrowed stuff. Maybe the items found on his person now that he's dead are not actually his, but rather they're items that he borrowed from someone else, and therefore using them to identify Reuven would not be a valid mechanism. So now says, one second. So now everyone's going a little bit of a tangent. So you're telling me now that when you find an accessory on a person, that maybe it's not really his, maybe he borrowed it. Well, if that's the case, the Gemara says, so we'll say, so 1 second, let's go full circle. Remember what we said before? What did we learn from Chamar? From the Chamar in the Pasuk, right? If Reuven loses a donkey, Reuven comes over to me, I find the donkey with the saddle. Reuven comes over to me, and Reuven says, the saddle has my initials carved into it. And sure enough, it does. What did we say before? You give back the donkey with the saddle. But why? Maybe Reuven borrowed the saddle from someone else who has the same initials, and therefore, again, that's not a good siman. Right? The Gemara says, no. The Gemara says, Ukaf lo she'uli inshi, uchpa mishun de miskav leila chamra. We'll say it's interesting. As much as people borrow stuff from each other, what don't people borrow? People don't borrow or lend saddles. Right? Why? Makes sense. We'll say because a saddle has to have almost like a custom fit for the animal. If not, what it ends up doing is scratching the hide of the animal. So Rabbi will say, you have to be choshesh for borrowing for a lot of things, but not for saddles. Okay, see by saying another possibility is, I will say, going back to the case of Reuven died, right? Do you want to identify the body? So the Brisa said you can't identify the body by simanim on the utensils. So by simanim on the accessories, right? I don't know, he has a money bag or something else. So the Gemara says, it's not going to work. Why? Keilav b'chiyure v'sumki. Well, so when we say that you can't identify Reuven's body through certain accessories or through certain kelim, that's talking about nondescript simanim. For example, I will say, he had a white accessory or a red accessory. So I will say those type of simanim which are very nondescript, that's not going to work. Elahad disanya, matzu kasha bekis o ba'arniki v'tabas o shematzu ben kelev afilu lizman meruba kasha. I will say we're going back now to a get case, right? Reuven is divorcing his wife Rachel, and what happens? He sends the get with a shaliach. And what happens? The shaliach lost the get. But let's say again the shaliach says, the get was tied in a bag, right? Or it was tied to a money purse, or it was tied ultimately again to a ring. Now, by the way, this doesn't even have to be a case of a shaliach. This could be the case of Reuven himself is divorcing his wife. He lost the get, but ultimately again, he's able to identify, I tied the get together with my signet ring. I tied the get together with my wallet. I put the get in a pouch. And sure enough, we find the get, and it's attached to the signet ring, to the pouch, ultimately again to a money bag. So we return the get to the husband in these cases. But 1 second. So the Gemara says, but if we're concerned that people lend out their utensils to each other, kimatza kasher bekis amai kasher. I don't understand. Even if you find the get tied to the wallet, why should the get be good? After all, the Gemara says, nechosh l'she'ela. Say that Reuven lent out his wallet to someone else, and maybe this get is not the same get. Amri kisva arniki v'tabas la mashali inshi. So it's incredible. People lend stuff. There are certain things they never lend. We will say, what do people never lend? People never lend their wallet, their money bag, and their wallet, as well as their signet ring. So it's interesting. The Gemara says, kisva arniki mishum de mesamni. I will say it was considered to be bad luck to lend out your wallet to someone. And also probably just a bad idea, right? But let me say, bad luck, why? Your wallet represents your financial mazel. So to give your financial mazel into the hands of someone else, that wasn't good. First white line, v'tavas mishum mizayif. And obviously, we'll say, people weren't quick to lend out their signet ring. Why? Because your signet ring, obviously, is that's your signature. Lending that out to other people, obviously, is a pretty dangerous proposition. So let me get tonight. So we'll say, so maybe this whole, so now, we're still stuck with our original question, which is, are simanim da'oraisa or are simanim da'rabanan? We haven't answered that. So let me ketanoi. Maybe the whole thing is machlokes time. Here we go. Ein me'idin ala shuma. So Rabbi say. So back to Reuven died. We need to identify the body. We need to identify the body in order to allow his wife Rachel to remarry. So let's say again, Reuven had a wart. So you can't identify a body by the presence of a wart. Yes, you can identify by a wart. So Rabbi say, what are they arguing about? The Tanakama serve simanim dirabanan. The Tanakama simanim are only dirabanan. So therefore, simanim will work in a mamon case, but won't work in an Isser case like this. Rabbi says no, simanin are da'oraisa, and that's why again, even in the case of allowing a woman to remarry, the presence of the wart is enough to allow to ascertain that this is the identity. To establish identity as Ruvain. Some Rava no. To call it alma simanin da'oraisa. No, in general, Rava says everyone agrees that simanin are da'oraisa. I saw some machlokes over here. V'hacha b'shuma Metzia b'bengilo k'mifligi. So this is actually very interesting. Here the machlokes is, do we assume that people who are born under the same astrological sign, do they have similar bodily features? Mar savar shuma Metzia b'bengilo. So one opinion says that it is common for people who are born under the same astrological sign to often have the same physical features, even to have like a same wart. Umar savar shuma eina Metzia b'bengilo. And ultimately, again, the other opinion says no, people born under the same astrological sign do not necessarily go ahead and have the same warts. Another possibility is others say no, even people born under the same astrological sign don't necessarily have the same physical features. And also here's the shaila: do physical features change after a person dies? Mar savar simanin asuyin l'shtanas la'achar misa, umar savar simanin ein asuyin l'shtanas la'achar misa. We'll have to stop over here for today. So the machlokes over here is, do physical signs, let's say a wart, does the appearance of that wart change after death or not? And that is the subject of the machlokes. So we'll stop over here, kind of stopping mid-topic. So we're still leaving off in the overarching topic, our simanin da'oraisa, our simanin d'Rabbanan. And we have session to be continued tomorrow. Shkoyach. The tabas, that's right. Still continued. Have a great day.